Hello everyone, I'm Professor Margaret Rogers Van Coops and you are listening to Dr. Margaret and Dr. Katie Speaks. Unfortunately, Katie is not too well, so this is a recording. I'm going to talk to you about the rejection syndrome. Here's my book, The Rejection Syndrome. You can see that little boy is looking very forlorn and miserable, sitting there all alone. And I can really identify with that because throughout my life, being a psychic from childhood, from birth actually, and healing a lot of people after World War II, there were a lot of people who were telling me how to behave. For example, I'm wearing green and blue. And in those days, they told you that you should never wear green and blue together. There's certain connotations about colour. Blue is of the mind and green is of the nervous system. So if you mix them up, you could have a mental discharge of imbalance in terms of green is also jealousy. And so aiming to get like other people and be accepted by other people was very much the thing of the times when I was born, because you have to realize in those days we really did have social class, upper class, middle class, lower class, and anybody else who happens to be like a transient on the streets or something like that. So what I'm talking about here with the rejection syndrome is better explained if I talk about me. So through the years that I was growing up, I had a lot of people who were telling me that I shouldn't be able to do what I can do. Being psychic was scary to them. They couldn't understand how a child would be able to know something about them. And yet at the same time they were curious because they wanted to know what I picked up about them. And of course, with so many dead people killed during air raids and things like that in England, there were a lot of wives who wanted to know, has my father passed on into heaven? Or, my husband is missing on the front line somewhere and he hasn't come home, the war's finished. Do you see if he's a prisoner or something? You'd be amazed how many questions I was asked as a child. And of course, my spirit guides were very supportive to me in those days. I could hear them orally as I can today. And they would just give me the messages that I would tell someone whatever it was they needed to hear. Well, of course, the burden of being able to make people happy was a heavy load on my shoulders. And I have to be honest that I was born into a post-traumatic stress disorder scenario, obviously being bombed every night in London. And my mother, obviously carrying me during that pregnancy, was bombed every night during London's air raids. So I was born actually neurotic without knowing it. I'm very lucky in that I had a strong personality. I'll talk about that in a while. And so it got me through those years. But as I got older and was pushed to fit in with the social structure, being born to what they called an upper class, having DNA and RNA relative to ancestors who were royalty once upon a time back in the 1600s or something. So everyone had to talk the Queen's English and sound like you were the Queen. So when my father came back from the war and found his daughter had a bit of a Cockney accent, he was very unhappy about that and made sure that I went to a better school, which my parents couldn't afford to pay for, but which they insisted I go to. And there I was given elocution lessons. So, how now, brown cow? Can you imagine sitting there, a young child of, 7 or 8, trying to repeat all these patterns, really feeling frustrated because it was a waste of time as far as I was concerned, even at that age. But ultimately, I picked up the ball, as it were, and ran with it and did develop the upper class talk. My mother always thought that she didn't hear my talking to be incorrect. However, we had the mixture of boys from the East End of London who talked like this. Here, mate, want a cup of tea? And so I was copying them, and I learned at that very young age just to fit in. If I didn't want to be bullied by those kids, I need to talk like them. So I didn't see anything wrong in it. I had no judgment on it. And so trying to fit in was a very early thing with my own peers of that age. And of course, when my father heard it, he was really ferocious that I wasn't, doing right, and always yelling at me, "You've got to speak the Queen's English," and so on. So I learned at a very young age between my parents that there were certain standards that I was supposed to live by, and yet here was my spirit guides telling me, it's okay, you can mix with anyone. Dad would go on through my teenagers' years to monitor all my friends, wanted to know all about their parents, wanted to know if they fitted in with me. Of course, my friends were not of our class, so that wasn't befitting me, but I pushed for that and won the day eventually that my friends, who were great friends, who spoke reasonably good English, were accepted. And I noticed through the years that whenever I had 3 friends, if a 4th friend turned up, I lost one of my 3 friends, and that person took the place. And so throughout my life, there's been a pattern. There's always 2 or 3 very solid friends who seem to know what I'm doing and enjoy what I'm doing, and that 3rd one who would say, why, what for, how, when? And so that was always giving me an opportunity to share what I knew and what I wanted to do. And fortunately, the 3rd friend was always curious and liked to hear what I had to say. But outside of that environment of parents, my sister, who was much younger than me, 4.5 years younger, and whom I had to be very responsible for because my mother was a cripple too. So there was a lot of stuff going on that I had to live with. And the ultimate thing was I always knew I wanted to be a nurse or a doctor. Little did I know that I would end up as I am today as a professor. But, in those days, nursing was by the upper class considered to be a skivvish job. So when I told my father I wanted to be a nurse, he immediately rejected the idea and told me I was born to be much greater than wiping bottoms and that I should think about doing something else. When I mentioned, well, I'd like to be a doctor, but I don't think I'm clever enough, he poo-pooed my negativity about it and started, pull your socks up, think like a woman who's going to be there in the future leading mankind. Of course, I had no idea what that would be like. But, when a child is exposed to all these beliefs and yet the psyche within self is really saying something different inside. And, of course, me hearing voices from Spirit and the Oneness, including archangels and God, who were telling me, don't worry about this, you'll overcome this, it'll be fine, and so on. As encouraging as it was, living in a world with so many negative people, it was very upsetting because if it wasn't people who believed in what I could do, it was the other side of the fence where people were saying, you're strange, you scare the pants off me, I don't believe you, I think you're evil, you must be a witch, and so on and so forth. And so you can understand the controversy within me long before I even went nursing. Well, I survived nursing and learned how to wipe bottoms and went on to do SRN, not to qualify all the way because I ended up getting married and having my first son. Now, my marriage was in itself a very big lesson. This first lesson, I married an older man, and I thought this would be wonderful. He was highly intelligent, very clever, and I was aspiring to more in my world and the things I was doing. So it turned out that I thought I was going to transform myself, become the mature woman and so on. But what I ended up finding out was I'd married a man who had black moods. And those black moods were, of course, chronic depressions, and I was a victim of punishments and hitting and so on. And I won't bore you with my whole story here, but I want you to understand I came out of that marriage in 5 years with 2 children, a lot of insecurity, asked my parents what I should do. What did they say? Margaret, it's the way of women. They have to suffer under a man's world. Go back for the sake of your children and put up with it. That was after 3 years. Well, I went back for 2 years and I was falling apart. So I finally decided to listen to my friends who were saying you can be divorced, but of course in those days there was no social support for women. So you can imagine how I felt. So what did I do? Well, my ex-husband was into nude photography. He forced me to be a model. And it turned out that being a model led to understanding more about my personality, my character. Of course, when one is exposed to cameramen, even though it was very genuine and nothing too bent, it was still highly embarrassing for me to take my clothes off. But ultimately, having been a nurse too, I knew what it was like to have nude people in front of me while I'm treating them. So I kind of tricked my mind to think how I could cope with this in order to please my first husband, who was very much demanding that I do this for his own pleasures of looking at photos. Of course, I grew out of that and found the power to get away. But this very modelling job that I had turned out to be a better job for me, because I went on to model clothes and other things, and like being in a tub and a bath for a commercial. And so I was able to make some money to feed myself and my child and keep a roof over my head. But not before I'd also, at the same time as divorcing my first husband, met my second husband. So yes, I was not without a man. And so he was very soft and tender and warm and caring. And so I decided, oh, this is much better than anything else I've had before. After 2 years of checking that my children really accepted him and loved him, he adopted them, we married, and we had a very good 2 years. Along came Warren. But after that, he started to drink and gamble and lie. And I found out much later that that was his history before I'd ever come into his life. And I'd met him during a window when he was completely dry. Yes, he liked his beer. He'd think nothing of knocking back 10 and coming home drunk every night, telling me he was going on a breakdown when in reality he was in a pub playing cards with his mates, while I'm worrying because the snow's coming down and I'm thinking he's out there all on his own picking up a truck and hauling it back because it's broken down for him to repair it. I was a fool, but I wanted to believe in him. Isn't that what we all want to do? We want to believe in our partners. We want them to be Mr. Ideal, Prince Charming. It's a very common scenario that my generation lived with, because there was no support for women with babies. So here I am with 3 children, and I've decided I've got 3 boys, I want a girl, and I've decided I'm going to make this marriage work. So he promised he would be better, and we talked and did whatever, and I'd studied psychology and psychiatry while I was married to my first husband, so I was very aware of everything I was saying, how I sounded, what I could do, and so on. But ultimately, that man did not keep his promises, did not try to build the marriage, and here I am with 4 children, falling on my face, as it were, trying to survive. And the depression set in. And in no time at all, I was shaking and trembling like nobody's business. So I went to my doctor. My doctor said, "Margaret, you have Parkinson's disease." And I'm saying, "You're joking." "No," he says, "it must be in your ancestors." And I said, "Well, it is actually. My grandma has Parkinson's disease very badly, and according to her history, her father had it." "Well," he said, "your father will probably have it too." I'm like, "Oh my goodness, why?" He said, "Well, it's a gene factor." Well, they didn't know much in those days, so I went home and I sat with my spirit guides and I said, "What is wrong with me?" And they just said, "Yes, you have it." So I went back to my doctor. My doctor's a very nice man, a friend of mine, and knew me well. And he said, "Margaret, there's a new pill out that I want to try with you. It's very tiny. You only take 1 twice a day." So I got the pills, but I didn't want them. I wasn't into pills. I was determined to try and cure myself without, telling anyone, not the family or anyone, and do my little meditations and do all the things that I'd learned to do. Now, I have to drop back in time a little bit here and say that from childhood, I was always seeing stones, pebbles on pathways, sometimes shards. I would see the aura of the stones as I saw it, but actually years later I learned that I was seeing the reflection of the sun into the stones, where there was quartz and other different compounds in the stones that were reflecting light. But to me at that time they were just pretty, and I picked them up and I took them home, and my mother would throw most of them away and I'd be angry because I wanted to keep them all. But of course by the time I was an adult I had quite a lot of stones, round pebbles and pointy shards and things like that. But you know, I was treating patients and exploring and doing things with them, but I didn't really know what the therapies were. I was still learning, and I was very much focusing on the states of mind. And while I was having all these worries with 4 boisterous children that never listened to me and always did what they wanted to do, just like their father, and father was still off out, never coming home, always lying, always cheating, and slowly I got more and more repressed, suppressed by these 5 dominant people in my life as I held back, because the more I said anything, the worse it became. So I became introverted. And as time went by, I was shaking more and more, and I think, did I take my pill? So I took a pill, and my shaking would stop, and then I would wait maybe what I think was 12 hours, and I'd be shaking like this again. And I couldn't have taken my pill, I couldn't remember. So I'd take another one. Well, apparently over 3 weeks, I was so confused as to how many pills I'd taken that I was ODing myself. Well, I was also running 5 magazines for a company where I was having to write articles, get advertising, and one of those magazines was Yoga Today. So I was practicing a lot of exercises and things, always trying to calm myself. I played my piano, I did whatever I could, but the weight and burden of bringing up 4 boisterous children, and that's a very simple word, I will say, they were a handful, and having lies and things coming at me from all 5, you can imagine how I felt. And so it was not long before I was totally depressed and subdued and shaking like nobody's business. I had migraines all the time. I was not a happy camper. Anyway, this particular night, I was trying to work on make sure I got enough ads for the magazine when I took 2 pills because I was shaking so much. And apparently that was the final dose that took me into a coma. What happened then was Red Cloud, one of my spirit guides I channeled a lot in public, because I did have a public side of me as well, which I'm leaving on the side at the moment as a medium, and took me to a phone in the house, dialed a number I didn't know, spoke on the phone in his voice, and told them that I was dying and to come home and save me. Well, I knew nothing about it. All I know was standing outside my body, watching my husband and my oldest son trying to walk me across the room with me flopping like a rag doll. Well, I guess they took me to hospital. I didn't remember that. That was still in my body then, and asked me how many pills I took. Well, apparently I kept saying 20 to all the pills they thought I possibly could have taken, which I hadn't. And the thing was, the 20 was really how many ads I needed in that magazine. So they all thought that I'd taken a bunch of different things and told my family that I wouldn't pass the night. I'd be gone. Well, sure enough, somewhere in the middle of the night, my heart stopped. And at that point, I had a long conversation with Spirit, short version here, and told them that, I can't do this anymore. This is too much. I need to leave. And they're like, well, you just started, this had all been your learning program. We've got so much work to do. Oh, no, I'm not staying anymore. It's been too much, too hard. From day 1 to now, I've had enough. And finally, they just said, well, okay. And at that moment, a massive amount of guilt came up. And I felt I can't let the team down. And so I said, well, I agree to stay if you give me something, and we promise you we will, was the reply. And I ended up recovering and going through a whole bunch of therapies that they went on to teach me. And that's where Master Chang came into my life and taught me about the rejection syndrome, along with Cornelius Tacitus, who basically is a historian of Roman period when he was born in 62, I think it is AD. But I didn't know all this about them at the time. They were new to me. Master Chang informed me that he had been working with me subdually through the crystals. And as a result of that, he introduced me to my shards again and to crystal acupuncture and later to pterogram therapy, while Cornelius Tacitus brought me back into my psychological training, the psychiatry, and all the things that I learned about over the years with my patients and people I've been working with over the years, and started to make me understand. My girl, he said, these were his words, my girl, you are daughter of the oneness, and you are in the rejection syndrome. I'm like, what's the rejection syndrome? I'm holding this up again so you can look again. By the way, you can get this book on Amazon. It's been up since 2006, so I've sold quite a few copies. So if you want to learn about the rejection syndrome, this is the book to get. All right, so coming back to that is my awakening to the rejection syndrome. I'd never heard of it before. We never studied that in psychology and psychiatry or massage or nursing or anything. We heard the word, you are rejecting yourself. We heard that you are rejecting someone else, but we never heard syndrome on the end. So that was a really a sort of new word to say in those days. It was just people were saying in England. I don't know about anywhere else in the world, but England was ahead at that time in the metaphysical studies. And I was one of the leaders at the top of the tree who was well known and recognized for my metaphysical training and my mediumship. So here I am saying, what is the rejection syndrome? And Master Chang said, you will begin to understand as we deprogram you from Parkinson's disease. Well, just so you know, no trembles. I've been Parkinson-free trembles since 3 weeks of Master Chang telling me at this time. How old was I? 35. So at that point, I'm taking the shards and I'm putting them on my fingertips. And I'm doing exactly what he says, which is to hold, see the energy coming from this finger into the, I haven't got the stone obviously, you'd have to imagine the stone in the middle there, into the stone, into my other finger, and going around my body. And I certainly could feel that. But there was something else going on. Each session that he taught me, I found myself having a different point of view on my old issues. So, for example, if I thought, I'm so depressed, I'm such a miserable poor me, nobody loves me, nobody cares, that turned into, why don't you love yourself? Well, it took a lot of thinking about how could I love myself, like maybe go back and play the piano again and sing a bit, or maybe I could read a book, because that was about where my head was at in those days. I didn't understand embracing the divine essence of my being. That was to come during the time that I was learning about the rejection syndrome. So what happened was, as I would hold that stone on my finger, Master Chang would say to me, we are going to focus on your physical body today, and we are going to change the muscle memory. I'm like, muscle memory? Okay, I know about that. I've learned about that in psychology. I know that when I learned to walk as a baby, that's a muscle memory. And if I had a stroke and I damaged that part of my brain, then I might forget how to walk and have to be trained again. So, that was what I was used to. But I wasn't used to the idea that every feeling, every thought, every place I touched, walked, people I've hugged, all these different things were by my brain saved in memory in every cell, in every muscle, and every bone, and every nerve ending in my body. I had no idea when he told me that just what was ahead of me. Because what I had to learn to understand was that the body senses through psychometry, which I knew about because I've been teaching about it for many years. And so I would feel the energy of other people come into my environment. I would read them, I would empathize with them, I would sympathize with them, I'd maybe do some healing on them with laying of hands, Reiki, and all those things that had no names in those days, beyond the laying of hands. And, doing little tapping and things that I suddenly felt to do in certain areas because spirit guides were with me, but no name for it. These all things came much, much later, years later. So one time I was not only using my crystals, but he had me tap my ligaments here on my hands that you can see are pretty near the surface because I'm not fat. So there I was tapping my knuckles and things like that. I didn't know why. And then he's having me breathe at the same time. And I found I was trembling sometimes. Sometimes I was calm. Sometimes my breathing was unstable. There were so many different little itty bitty things that seemed to come out of me. And so after a few of those kind of episodes, I started to say, why am I tapping? What's happening? Why does this happen? Then he would start to say, well, that's memory. And I'd say, well, what memory? And they'd say, well, think how much you've used your hands throughout your life. And I'd say, well, every day, all the time. And then he'd say things like, well, do you think about how you smell? Now, I was just thinking about that, and I'm working on my face again even now, and I've been getting an itchy nose just here consistently over the last 3 weeks. Sometimes it feels a little numb, sometimes it feels like I've got a hair there and I haven't, so there may be a real thing or maybe not, and so this gives you an example of how I was back then, so long ago at the age of 35, not knowing what was going on, but getting these sensations throughout my body that could be anything from a sharp pain to a numbness to an ache to a throb to a sense of movement that was more like a jolt, and I thought, where did that come from? Why did I do that? And so slowly Cornelia started to come into my life and say to me, that is a thought that you just released. Oh, how did I release it? By jolting. Okay, it's like I just threw it away. But it's still in my mind. I was still thinking, I do have a hair on my face today. If I can get rid of it. Okay, the things that he taught me biochemically began to make sense, that every thought has an emotion attached to it. So every thought and emotion is stored in the position that I was in at the time of having the emotional thought. Now, at that time, I thought to myself, how many thoughts have I had? And his reply was, it's useless to count, but we will say billions. Well, at that time, billions wasn't often used because we talked about millions. So what was billions? Well, 100 millions? I couldn't even begin to imagine it. But when I started to watch my thoughts through the days in observation, like having a part of me on my shoulder, and I actually use this term, I have Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder from Pinocchio, who would say to me in some way, you just had a thought, what's your body doing? And I started to notice that if I had a negative thought, then the twitch might come back, or the ache, or the pressure point, or the sense of a rivulet of water running down my body sometimes when there was no water present. It was really strange. And I began to realize as I was going through these things that it wasn't just when I'm up and about. It was while I was, in the shower naked. It was while I'd been modeling. It was while I'd been a baby, infant. So there were so many little things that I caught that I began to understand were very negative emotions that had been controlled constantly by my thought patterns in my conscious mind, that I was unloved, abused, misused, whatever you want to say in some way, from my point of view, by people in the world who'd come into my life and taken from me. For example, someone comes into your life and they say, oh, I really want to help you. I would love to support you and promote your readings. Just give me a reading and I'll have something to show and tell, and I'll go away and I'll tell all my friends and we'll get something happening. And of course you do that and you buy the lie and they walk away, they're happy, they got a really good reading. You call up later, did you tell anyone? Oh, no, sorry, I've been so busy. And I will tell you that even now, today, with the virus and all the things that are going on, I'm still getting people like that come into my life who are so grateful for everything that I've done for them, who swear that they're going to make a little testimony or a video and don't. Why is that, I asked? Well, because I cannot rely on others. Ultimately, what I learned through the rejection syndrome is the only person that I could rely on in this world is me. And I have a choice of how I use me in this world throughout my life. Well, I've lived 79 years on this planet, and I hope you'll see that by my appearance that I'm not acting like I'm a decrepit old woman with Parkinson's disease walking around like this. Okay, so what did I do? Basically, I had to learn that every single muscle is made up of fiber, and the fiber is made up of tiny cells. And the tiny cells are coded with every movement I've ever done, but it's only brought forward into the conscious mind when I am feeling either height of joy or the depth of negativity. In other words, I'm depressed, which doesn't happen much these days. But think of this. You're in class. Please, miss. Please, miss. Ooh, ooh. Please, miss. And waving your hand around. She's ignoring you. Finally, she asks you, what do you want? And you say, I really need the bathroom. You have to wait for the bell. I can't wait for the bathroom. Okay? Now, in my case, I remember running out anyway to the bathroom. My tummy ache. You know why. Don't need to say the rest. And so when I came back into the classroom, I got told I was punished and I couldn't go out into the playground. And when I tried to tell the teacher I had an upset stomach, she didn't want to listen because she was rushing off to get her cup of tea in the break time. Unfair, yes, I knew it was unfair. Did I stay in the classroom? Yes. Why? Because I was frightened of more punishment. Okay? Fear. Fear is the main energy that is emotional, that comes to us every day of our life. Why? Because we have to survive and live in this world. So as soon as we're able to sit up on the floor and crawl around, we are learning about fear. We learn it by mother saying, no, don't touch that, or father saying, come here, stop it, and picks you up. When you just wanted to do something, you didn't get to do what you wanted to do. It wasn't about whether you needed to be protected or not. You didn't understand that either. You just wanted to touch that thing, and they're pulling you away for your own good. But to you, I didn't get to do, I'm upset, I'm miserable, and you wriggle, because that's what you know to do. You're not in control of your body totally, but your brain is monitoring that wriggle, and it's monitoring how you felt when you were denied what you wanted. And hear that word, denied. So, you grow up and people come into your life and they tell you about Sunday school, and there's a God and there's angels, and they're all looking after you. They're shining down on you, and you've only got to say your prayer in whatever religion it is, and God will protect you. So next time you're upset, you sit there and you ardently believe this, and you say your prayers, and believe you me, I said many prayers, and nothing happens. Where's the protection? Along comes your sibling or daddy or mummy who's in a mood, and okay, in those days it was fine to slap a kid or beat their butt or whatever. I can tell you I was hit many, many times by my dad for my sister's untidiness, because I was responsible for her to put her toys away. She was 4.5 years younger. Mother was a cripple. If mother trod on those toys and tripped over, my fault. So dad would come along, see that, whack. Why didn't you pick that up? I told my sister to pick it up. She wouldn't. Whack. You should pick it up. I mean, you walk around like this in the end, you're waiting to be hit, okay? Now, I'm sure from my father's point of view, he thought he was doing the best he could rearing girls. But on the other side of the fence, he's a boy, and he grew up upper class, going to the prep schools, which is a private school when you're 4.5. And yes, rulers were hit on kids at 4.5 on their hands. And the older boys had permission to cane the younger boys when they went up to their 10-year-old school. So my dad was bullied throughout his life. And so in his mind, the upper class get bullied. That's all about making you a man. Well, I'm not a boy, but he wants me to be a boy. He wants me to be like a boy. He wants me to do what he wants. So I was a tomboy. I climbed trees. I loved it. In fact, I climbed trees to get away from all the negativity that was on the earth. Up there in that tree, I felt healed. I felt safe. Yep, 60, 70 feet off the ground. I wasn't afraid. I just liked to be there. It was the only place that felt safe. And my dad encouraged me to climb trees. I had bows and arrows. I had guns to play with. It was all about a girl should know how to protect herself. But the one person I couldn't protect myself was my dad. And of course, I repeated that when I got married. My first husband, he beat me up. My second husband never touched me. He was a thorough gentleman that way. But he beat me up emotionally by lying to me, by not sleeping with me, by telling me he loved me and then telling me he hated me. And there was nothing I'd done in those days. It grew as he got worse because of the alcohol. And then my third husband was an angel. Nothing wrong with him. He was very supportive to me, but he always doubted himself. And so I had to be there for him all the time to help him be stronger in the way that he worked with me. So I didn't have a safe figure. I had to be his safe figure, and unfortunately he passed 2 years ago with heart issues, kidney issues, the whole caboodle. And ultimately you understand this was fear that caused that within him. I managed to get him to lecture a few times because he was qualified himself in many areas, but he hated being in front of people. He thought he would be judged. He thought he'd dry up. And whenever he did a good job, but he didn't see the good in him. And he was in competition with me by his mind, and that put him into cellular neuromuscular memory infraction. In other words, it was splitting up. His energy was constantly mind, heart, separate places. Unless it was around me for my work, then he was focused. But I tried to get him to focus on himself. Impossible. Okay? He needed to care about someone else. Why? Because that was the way he was brought up. His mother cared about his father, who had Parkinson's disease. So you see, the lessons come and go. My point this is that no matter what I learned as a child, there were grades of levels, if you like, to go through. So by the time I was 35 and I clinically died and was brought back, I was brought back with a new consciousness. Now, that consciousness didn't just happen. It was always there. It was just that it was dormant within me. And who better to bring it forward in my awareness than my spirit guides? So what they were doing was teaching me by my own illness to go through my own states of mind and my own states of emotion to see how one can encode the brain to be totally focused consciously on the negative while completely ignoring the positives that happen every day of our life. I'll give you a recent negative. I was rushing around as usual and went to the Goodwill store to find myself a little grill and did find one because Spirit told me there was one, go there. So I listened and I go and do and I got it. Yes, hey, that was a positive. I get home and the bag doesn't have it in there, and I'd assumed a woman had put them all together, and I hadn't thought about weight or anything, because when I left the store I'm thinking, well, I've got the grill, I can get home and cook me a hamburger on it. There's something like that. And oh, I've got this to do and I've got that to do and so on. So it was a couple of hours before I realised I hadn't got the grill because I was finally ready to eat. Oh, I have to go back. So I went back and I asked Spirit, I said, please, I hope you've kept it safe for me. And when I got there it was in the bag, just nestled under the shields that they put up these days, waiting for me, and no one there trying to take it. And I got it, told the young guy who was on the other till. He said, fine, checked my receipt, and off I went. And hey, thank you, Spirit Guides. But let me fast back in time to when I was in England, and I left my purse on my pram. And when I came out, because I realised I'd forgotten it, it was stolen. I learned the lesson then, never leave your purse, so I thought. Well, over the years I've had 5 or 6 episodes of leaving my purse somewhere, and as for English, it's handbag, and all my specials in there that I need and treasure, and lost 3 times, and here in America found it 3 times. So here's a balance. Somewhere I've learned between I've not been good, not cautious or whatever, to I trust the oneness, that if I do forget, it's not the end of the world because they've got my back. And how did they get my back? Through positive people. People who know that I'll be back within their instinct, their intuition, and so they put it in a place that's safe for me when I come back. Whereas in the old me, when I was negative, I was attracting negative people to me, and negative people, aha, so a gift, someone's left this out just for me, I need it. And without a blink, it's gone. So my point here is that the rejection syndrome is very much about embracing all that is negative. Now, if you think about all the things that you have an opinion about, for example, I love ice cream and I hate spaghetti. Actually, I love both, but never mind. Okay, my mind would then say, every time I see spaghetti, yuck, I don't want to eat that food. It's bad for me. And every time I've made it, because my kids love it, I've had it and eaten it because I can't afford to cook separate meals for everyone. So one rationalizes, okay, it's not so bad, I'll eat it. Okay. Over time, I suddenly find I'm getting fat, or I've got disruptive bowels or something. And over time, I wonder what's wrong with me. Well, ultimately, I did find out that it was nothing to do with the spaghetti that I actually loved. It was to do with the tomatoes, or tomatoes, as we say in England. And that was actually not the actual flesh, but the pips. So I started to understand that my digestive system was not working very productively because I was eating tomatoes. Okay, so when do I eat them now? I scoop out the seeds, and I can still have the flesh in my salad, and I'm fine. But if we didn't have an awareness that our body was sick in the first place, and we didn't pay attention to what we ate, then we might never find out that we have an allergy to something. So if we look back in the 80s, we can see a lot of people who came out of the woodwork, as it were, with all these different menus for people who have irritable bowel syndrome and so on. And if you're this type of person, you're a fat person. If you're that type of person, you're a skinny rake person, then you're that type of person. So you eat this and you don't eat that, and so on. Well, I did have a little go with that, and as I'm doing it, I'm thinking, I don't know, this doesn't feel right. So I finally turned to Master Chang and I said, is this right for me? He said, absolutely not. And I said, well, why is that? He said, because it has nothing to do with what you're eating. It has everything to do with your emotional self that punishes yourself when you remember a time that was miserable. So I'm saying, well, I'm not consciously thinking that the last time I ate spaghetti, I'm going to get an upset stomach. He said, no, you're not thinking it because you've thought it so many times. Your subconscious just sees it as an image and immediately connects to the deep subconscious that says, don't eat it or eat it, depending on whether it's good for you or not good for you. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's a little bit of a note. But it took time. It took time to understand that the deep subconscious, your spirit mind, is actually saying, caution, remember, and sending a little impulse into the subconscious mind where there's nothing but images to have you pull up, for example, 2 images, which might be the spaghetti, as I've mentioned that, and my visit to the bathroom when I was 8 years old when teacher was punishing me. And at first I would think, well, what's that got to do with spaghetti? Mum didn't even cook spaghetti. We didn't even get spaghetti in those days, you know. And I started to realize it wasn't to do with the memories of when and where and who. It was to do with the emotion that I felt. And so I started to focus on my fear, coming back to that word, and to realize over the next 20 odd years that I had a tremendous amount of fear of failure, of loss, of being abused, misused, of being trapped, of being forced to do something, and the list goes on. Now, those are just a few words that I've used that are what we call restriction. Whether we restrict ourselves or whether we are restricted by a teacher or a priest or the boss at work. There's 1,001 scenarios where we go out into the world because we're taught we have to do it, such as we have to go to school, we have to go to work, we have to go to the church, synagogue, and so on. If we don't, we're sinners. If we don't go to work, we're not contributing to society. If we don't go to school, we'll never be brilliant, we'll never be able to pass the exams, and then we'll be working on a farm or in a factory. Hey, working in a farm and on a factory is not the end of the world, because without those people, we wouldn't have what we've got today. But nobody talked like that in those days. There weren't any unions for people. There wasn't any fair treatment between our races. There was so much negativity that I grew up during the end of World War II, and the rubbish that my family kept throwing at me about ancestry and World War I, and wars before that, going back to 1066 and William the Conqueror. Yeah, we had family doing that. I mean, I'm taught to be proud about that. And in a way, I am proud that I can say I have a connection with that far back, but not for being royalty or upper class, but that my spirit is able to recall some of those things. And oh, that is interesting, because it's like you were there. It's like watching a movie, okay? But the identity of what people give you around you, say, to remember this, can be shocking. So, or supposing you're driving a car and someone hits your car. That's a shock. It's a physical shock. Or maybe someone in front of you drops dead from a heart attack and you're trying to save them and you fail. That's a shock. There's 101 different scenarios. I'm sure you can do your homework thinking about all the different times that you have in some way been shocked. You could be shocked by someone turning up in your life with wearing some clothes that you'd never dreamed you'd ever see anybody wearing. By the way, you're seeing me touch my face here, eyes, because shocked is about feeling and seeing and hearing. Think about a sudden sound that you're not expecting, like a gunshot, or the blast of a car when its exhaust blows out. You don't get that today, but years ago you did. Or maybe a tree falling down in the wind right near where you are. You know, there's so many sounds that we've heard, and all those sounds have a connotation in your mind as to whether it was a good sound or a bad sound. So let's talk about a baby crying non-stop, newborn baby crying and crying, and mummy is so tired because she's been through the birthing and she doesn't know what to do. It's her first child. How is she going to cope with a crying baby? Well, that was me. My eldest didn't stop crying day in, day out for weeks. And it was all to do with the fact that I didn't have enough milk. And all to do with the fact that the midwife was saying, you must breastfeed. So I'm struggling until I'm so emotionally traumatized that I go in mad, angry. So that's another key thing, that I go to my doctor and I insist he gets me the ability, I had to get permission to put my baby on the bottle. Yeah, can you believe that? Get permission from a doctor. Because the midwife would never agree either until he wrote a script saying this mother is allowed to feed her child with a bottle. Today, everybody would laugh at that. But in those days, these kinds of setups were important to everyone who had a job. This is my job, this is your job. They interact, or these jobs interact. Well, they do today, but in a different way, on a video like this. Or, someone doing an interview with you on an issue. Even court cases right now are done on video because of the dreaded liturgy. So we've changed. We've also done away with class distinction, which is wonderful. And we're slowly doing away with race distinction. Thank God. But why are people keeping it alive? Because they are the children of the children who kept it alive. So when I was brought up that we are class, upper class and royalty, what did I do? I said, I'm dumping that. I don't care if I'm supposed to only hobnob with other people like me. I'm going to hobnob with the people on the street. And my dad said to me one day, why do you do that? And I said, because they're the people that need me. And so he became my student. And I'm happy to say that over the years, long before his death, he lived to be 100, he learned from me, he opened up that side of himself, and by the end of his life, he was hobnobbing, as we say in England, with anybody and everybody, and never pulled up his history, but always talked about how things were and how they are today, helping the youngsters to know that they should be grateful for the fact that there is so much more freedom now. But I have a point about that. Because too much freedom leaves too much independence, which leads to too much disorganization, which then leads to feeling one doesn't fit in because there's so much going on. You're divided by 1,001 things. You can't pay focal attention to what is truly important to you. So you become scattered, you fail your exams, you don't apply yourself in school, you want to hobnob, and then there was drugs, and that goes on, and so on. And we have a lot of youngsters who don't fit in with anyone anywhere. And they became a problem in the 90s and even into 2000. So what do we have? We have friction here. Let's go back in time. I'm a small child. I want to take all these stones home that I found on the beach because they're all pretty looking. And Mummy comes along and picks up the bucket, and I try to take it, and she's pulling it away from me, and she's saying, no, you have to throw those away, you could only have two, and I want them all. A tug of war. We do that emotionally all the time with people. I want what you want. If you don't give it to me, I'll take it. Okay? That's what my mother was saying. Give it to me. You can't have it. I'm having it. There are other people who say, look, I don't want this. You have it. You have it. I'm throwing it at you constantly. I'm sorry, I don't want it. I have no room for it in my bucket. Okay? Or it's not the kind of stone I want. Yes, I had those moments because sometimes my dad would come along and find a stone. He'd think it's a nice round one or something and give it to me to put in my bucket. And I'd be like, no, I don't want that. It hasn't got any sparkles. What sparkles? Yeah, well, it's wet. The sun's shining on it. It's wet. Okay, there was a little lesson there. I didn't yet understand that water does reflect light, but I was interested in the sparkles. Okay, so even at the young age, I was in rejection of my parents. So I want you to hear it's a two-way street. We say, I'm rejection of what you want me to do. Clean my teeth every night? I don't want to. I'm too lazy. I'm just tired. I want to go to bed. Clean your teeth. Well, of course, I'm glad I did. They lasted me until I was in my 50s. These are not mine. So what you have to understand is that vanity comes up. Oh, I have to have my teeth pulled. Oh, I'm never going to look as beautiful. Oh, it's rejecting self, putting self down. I look at this princess, somebody, and I'm looking at me in the mirror, and I'm plain Jane, okay? We can't do that to ourselves. You're rejecting yourself. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and you must behold yourself. So when you look in that mirror, instead of, oh, which I used to do, I go, yeah, that's nice, I'm smiling. I can see the different me. You need to show your eyes the nice things in life. And you need to have joy when you see those nice things. One of the things that I gave some of my students to do back in the 90s was, in getting them out of the rejection syndrome, was to go around a store and touch everything. Well, do you remember we were told as children, don't touch anything in the store. You might have sticky hands or whatever it was in those days. But now you're an adult, you can go around, pick everything up, look at it, inspect it, just as though you might be going to buy it, and put it back. But instead of just being curious, I want you to say, as you pick up those things, I'm a free agent, I'll touch whatever I want to touch. Now, I also had students who were studying with me who were like, I really want to be a healer, but I'm frightened to touch this person. Reiki might do fine. You can do all that around and not touch them. But hey, people want to be touched. So I made a simple thing. All you say to them is, I'm a therapist, may I touch you? And of course they're going to say yes. Then you are duty bound because they've said yes to touch them. So you have to overcome your fear and touch them. And you can touch them so gently. You have to go like that. We're not smacking you. We're touching you, okay? We all need gentle touching. I have another therapy called sensory touch therapy. That's where you very gently stroke, and you do that for a while so that it gets tickly, and then afterwards you can use the back of your nail to scrape it. Causes a different sensation. Now my whole finger there, just doing that, is tingling. If I do the underneath, it's tickling. If I scratch it, and I can go backwards and forwards, I'm releasing the tickle, but I'm also sending energy up to my brain. Now my brain is saying, oh, I remember my father tickling me to death and I hated it. And at that point, I can also say, I remember STT, sensory touch therapy, and so I am releasing that memory of Dad tickling me. Blow it away. Breathe with breath. Blow it away. You can do as much breathing as you want. You're rejecting whatever your thoughts had. Don't forget this book, because in here is so much more than I can say to you today. So if you're really interested and you really want to know even more about this topic, buy the book. Okay, that's why I wrote it, so people can learn about it. All right, so when you're doing whatever you're doing in terms of working on yourself, always remember that for everything that you reject, underneath it is something positive, something that you care about, something that you love to do. Okay, and when you do that, instead of critiquing yourself like, well, I just did this drawing and it's not so good, the proportions out. Instead, look at it and say, wow, I did a drawing and it's wonderful for today. Okay, and next time I'll practice a little bit more. Maybe I've decided as a result of what I see, I want to go and join a class and have some fun in an art class. You have to be the door opener for yourself. Now, what's important to also understand is that while you're in your mother's womb, and I'm doing a very short thing here because there's so much in that book that I talked about that I can't possibly cover it all now. But when you're in the womb, you are copying your mother already from a spirit-to-spirit point of view. She has what we call a soul structure coding. You have yours. And so when you come in as a spirit into your mother's body to live in there, while after the beginning of the second trimester, you're not in there before that. The first trimester is for mother to decide whether she wants to be a mother or not. There's no law against what she does with her body. Okay, so here you are, you're in the womb, you're bonding with her, she's taking your coding, you're taking her coding. What she gets from you is an undeveloped soul coding, because you're an infant, you haven't been born yet. So that means it's subliminally in the deep subconscious of her brain, where her own spirit coding is. And what she gives you in return while in the womb is her emotional self and mental self from the subconscious, which is about here, which is where all your energy is flipping around here, digging up pictures of things that she has seen and putting them into your brain. But of course you have no knowledge, no wisdom on a conscious level of life here. So your spirit self at the back is processing what your mother has been through and integrating it into the back of your brain for you to learn her habits, her routines, her rituals in the way that she lives her life, so that when you're born, you will adhere to her joyfully, copy her for a period of time until you realize A, doesn't suit you, or B, you want to go beyond it. So once you're programmed by your mother's associations during the pregnancy, you could be programmed to be negative because she's negative, bearing the brunt of bad marriage, war, and so on in my case. Could be no money, could be out on the street, living in a car, who knows? We've had many scenarios over the years. You can think about yours. And so while your mother's carrying you, it could in some way give her a headache. And believe it or not, headaches of when your brain is working between the conscious, subconscious and deep subconscious into the soul coding could give you a migraine. And if it gives you a migraine, what you're really saying is, I need to dump mother, or I need to dump my associations with mother and whatever she's brought into my life throughout her life, if she's still living. Clean up your act with her, or B, forgive her and move on and say, as a result of her, I've evolved to this person I am today. But let me take a look and let me see, is there still some of her negativity in me? Am I still doing some of that? If so, I need to work on my DNA, because that's where your soul coding goes. It goes into the brain, lives back here, and constantly is, shall we say, controlling and balancing what you visualize and what you think all the time. Now, if your brain is running 100 miles an hour, you might even find pain here when you touch your head, because it feels like you've bruised it. But these points in your brain are releasing through your crown chakra as much as you can. But if you're not releasing, if you're justifying and holding on to your rationale because you remember images and you think about it all the time, then you're going to get a headache. Okay? Thinking about everything is not good, because your brain can only handle here in the consciousness one thing at a time. So what does it do? It's like popper beads. It pulls a visual forward here and remembers a story. Then it pulls another visual forward and remembers a story and pops them together. And so on, until you have a string of popper beads of issues, of memories, of events that have happened, and boy, do you have a migraine. Or your body is reacting to it, and you're feeling lethargic. You're feeling your face is all right, screwed up like this, and your jaws are all tight, and your ears are popping, and your neck's tight, and your shoulders are up, and before you know where you are, you're old, and you're walking around like this. Well, I saw that in my grandma, who was 62 and died, and I thought, oh, it's not happening to me. And it didn't, because I spent 20 years can't even say the word, deprogramming my mother and me in the negative modalities from womb till now. And guess what I'm doing right now? I'm still working on myself. I went into my mother in the womb, and I went from my mother in the womb to her mother when she was in the womb. And what did I see? The same expression. I felt the same energy in all three of us, where I was tight here. So I started to work on that. I'm going to write another book about the 5 senses, psychic senses, the 5 physical senses that we have, smell, taste, etc., and the 5 sensations of fear, pain, anger, guilt, loss, all relative to all of this, tied in, which comes together to cause the rejection syndrome. So briefly here, what you're going to find in this book, and I keep pulling it up because I don't want you to forget that it's available, because I am going to be available to answer your questions when we teach this online later. Okay? So coming back to the rejection syndrome, a syndrome is a state of being where it's so habitual that you can't stop it. So you can understand by the few things I've mentioned here how complicated we are just with those things. Now let's relate it then to sports. You want to be a racer and compete, say, at the heats that they have in your country. And you're jived up, and your teacher's jived up, and you're going to win, and so on. And 2 days before, you twist your ankle. What a letdown. You've let yourself down. You should have watched where you were going. Or maybe that kid pushed you and you twiddled your leg the wrong way and went down, and that happened. It's their fault. Now I can't compete. You could go on 1,001 ways with rationalizing that, couldn't you? And then tell yourself, well, I wasn't meant to do it. I'll give up. I'll never run. It's just the school thing. And yet, if you go up in the park and you decide to exercise a bit and do a trot running, you love it. And you just say, well, I always wanted to run, but I can't really run. And then one day someone says, there's a marathon. You know, I wouldn't be able to go more than 100 yards, you know. Well, so what? Start. If you don't start, you'll never start. That's what I learned. You have to begin somewhere. And if you begin with the fact that you know that you don't like to do it, or you're nervous to do it, or you're afraid to do it, that's the place to start, because that's where it takes courage. Now, coming back to your mother in the womb and so on, you've also got the sperm from your DNA, from dad, in you. So you could look like mum and look like dad on different days, depending on the expressions you use. You could take on the body of mum or the body of dad in size and temper, in the way that you move it and work with it and so on. There's a lot of habitual things I've seen, mums, dads and grandchildren with their own children all sitting on the sofa side by side, and they're all sitting there like this, listening, okay, or they're sitting like this. You know, we do copy a lot of body states from the people we trust. But is that a good position to be in? I saw a woman in the store the other day, and I'm going to try and do a sideways thing. I don't know if I can do it. That was her. That's how she was walking around. And she was only 24, 5. She was already stuck in that position. It was not a natal thing, because I could read her aura and see that she has been abused and misused in her early years, and so she's in the cowing position. So we have body language that says, I'm not receptive right now. Now, in the old days, in the 1800s, in the upper class, there were signs like, if I wanted to talk to you, I'd talk and I'd be nice, and then when I've had enough of you, I would look like that. And that person watching me would know that means they're dismissed. Even if they're an equal to that person, it means I've had enough, stop. Body language was very much an in thing back then, to let people know when you're approachable or not approachable. Today, people just barge in, okay? So we have to actually say something like, excuse me, give me 5 minutes. And then they get the message. But that is in itself an interruption to the flow of what a person's doing. And that interruption to the flow of thought or whatever you're doing is also going to be a button pusher into all the other times throughout your life that someone's interrupted you and stopped you from doing what you were doing. And all the emotions, the annoyance, the frustrations, or whatever it is that has in some way disturbed you. So that is in every cell in your body. Now, why is all this going into every cell in your body? Because of your soul coding. So I'm going to give you just a small part here. We come in with an archetype. The archetype, there are 7 of them, can be king, warrior, sage, priest, artisan, scholar, and what was the last? There's one more. I think I've missed one. Artisan, did I say artisan? And slave. Okay. And so the time of the universal consciousness of when you were born is beyond knowing at this time in our world for us to really relate to it. So you might just be sitting there musing and suddenly feel like, oh, I was alive when the prehistoric animals were running around. Well, you probably were. But you can't prove it or disprove it, and it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that in that coding of your old archetype self are the experiences of your whole existence as a spirit coming into this body to make sure you can live in it. Now, you know, it gets more complicated. That's why I'm saying you have to read the book. But you can borrow one of the others as a mask. So I'm a warrior, okay, but I like to wear the mask of the sage because I've got all this wisdom I want to share with you. So I can stand there and teach and be confident that I'm teaching because I know what I'm teaching. So everything works very well for me, all right? But what if I wanted to be the artisan? Then I could put that mask on and go out and sing you a song, because I like to do that too, as well as paint and draw and make things. So the older we are, the old soul that we are, the more masks we can wear. And sometimes it's difficult to really define what a person is. But if we're a mature soul, then we're into self-doubt, we're into, I want people to like me, build up my self-esteem. So they're always seeking support, they're always looking for someone to tell them they're great. And if they don't get the compliments, they're frustrated and they blame and shame and judge people for not being there for them. Okay? But that's okay, because a mature soul probably didn't come on the planet till maybe 500,000 years instead of 1 million. So yeah, they were activated by the oneness at a later date. So they're behind in the program of learning. If we were all the same age, all the same time of all the universe, then we wouldn't ever grow, because we'd all be saying, I know, I know, I know, I know. We need controversy. So that's the archetypes. And then we have to have a personality. So we choose modes. I'm not going to go into them all. I'm just giving you mine for the moment. My mode in my intellect is actually passion. Passion inspires me to think and find things out. Okay, my energy in terms of wanting to never give up is perseverance. And believe you me, throughout my life, there are 1,001 times I think, why am I doing this? I want to stop. But I can't, because I'm motivated by perseverance to keep trying. And then I have power and passion. Power is the energy of my presence here. You know, whatever I'm doing in some way, I could dominate you and say, I'm the boss, go do this now. Or I could kindly come up and say, I'd really love it if you would go and do this for me right now. Is that possible? See, so I had to learn tact and tolerance and all these different things. So we define our character by the way we mix these together. There are 7 modes, and we can mix 7 of them, but we only have 3 that are primary to the soul coding. And then the last part I want to really push on you is goals. We weren't born just to twiddle our thumbs and play around. We have a goal. Now, my goal in terms of using the sage and the warrior is to teach, because I'd like to leave people, which is generations to come, some info, which i.e. this book, I'm going to not let you forget it, pass it on to other people, because they need to know that their character and personality is controlled by the soul structure coding. And when you know that and you learn about it, I do have more books and things on it, but this is your starting point. Then you start to understand that you do have a multitude of choices in order to define who you are and the way you want to present yourself to the world. Now, you might say, well, okay, if there's all this beauty, how come there are people who are born to be destructive and violent and aggressive and so on? Well, it doesn't mean they're not old souls. Sometimes old souls volunteer to come into embodiment at a time when the world needs to be shaken up, as it were, and get us all to start thinking about having unity in a new direction. So friction is the word here. We need controversy. And so sometimes old souls come in as master teachers and end up seeing as though they're the tyrant that's dominating the entire world, i.e. Hitler. Yes, he was a very old soul. And yes, he was demoralizing and so on. In my book, The Journey into an Unknown World, The Way to One is revisited more there, much more, a lot to learn. It's a life learning book that I first wrote after I came back from my death scenario. And believe you me, it's something that I needed to know for myself at that time. And if you were to get that book and read it, you would not digest it all straight away. Nor did I. It took me 20 odd years to master everything that was in there. But it's a beginning. And if you're ready to go into the unknown, There's lots of meditations in there that Spirit gave me as well that you can record in your own voice and listen to yourself, and even embellish them with your own words, and lead yourself into the oneness. Okay, so don't have a copy of that here because I'm not pushing that on you, but it's again called Journey into an Unknown World, The Way to Oneness Revisited. That's the rewrite that I did more 15 years ago. Okay, so coming back to you've now got an understanding, you've come in with a goal. My goal is acceptance. It's opposing is rejection. So if someone rejects me who is learning rejection, they're going to say, I don't like your book or something. Then I'm on the other side of the fence going, oh, that's okay. You'll read it if you ever want to. How about this one? And give them an alternative, or let them go altogether. The person who's rejecting me will then say something like, I'm not ready for it. I don't know that I'll ever be ready for it, but just write it down in case. That's an open-minded sense of the two working in productive ways. But hey, if I was in acceptance of just being a teacher, I would never be a singer, a dancer, whatever. I would narrow my field. But that wasn't my journey in this life. I wanted to have all the choices I could have by having power, passion, and perseverance to never give up. So whatever I want to try, I'm jolly well going to try it until I'm exhausted sometimes. But ultimately, I learn a lot by trying, and I advise you to try, because you never can lose out when you try. Something happens somehow, even if it's just to teach you you're a klutz when you drop something. I've broken 3 glass things in the last month. I know, what's happening with these hands? Nothing. It's just that I forgot I was holding them because I was so busy thinking about what I was carrying in this hand. Doubting Thomas? Forgetfulness? Who knows? Did I worry about it? No. I meditated on it and make sure that I hold glass things tighter. Okay? There's always a point in self that you can reject what happened and grow into something new that is what you want to happen. You are a master of yourself. Okay, so I've just given you 2 of the goals. There are caution, there is obedience. So, I don't want to go into all that right now because it's too complicated, but like I said, it's in the book. I start by talking about everything in the book and then go into the soul structure halfway through, so you'll be able to follow it easily. Now, another part that I wanted to talk about is the chief feature. None of them are nice. Stubbornness, martyrdom. It's hard to always remember when I've got Spirit in my head to supplying me with information. But, the main thing is to recognize that the chief feature, they're not nice because they're the things we do to sacrifice ourselves, and sacrifice is one of them, but I'm using that in the overview here, where we hold ourselves back in front of other people. Self-deprecation, for example. Oh, here's this singer on the stage. I just met that famous person. I love to sing karaoke, but I'm never going to open my mouth in front of that person because they'll just tell me I'm lousy and go away and practice some more. So I love it when I watch The X Factor and there's these 3 stars who are all famous for their wonderful voices, and along comes these people who have the courage to stand up in front of them and sing, and those people's mouths drop open because you see they hear what the beauty is of that person who's had the courage to speak. You have to have courage to overcome the rejection syndrome. You have to have courage to use your chief feature. So if you're in a sacrificial lamb scenario, I've cooked all these meals for all these people, make sure they all eat. Oh, there's hardly any left for me, but never mind, I'll eat later. Who wants you to be a martyr? Nobody asked you to. Next time, get in the front of the line. Say, everybody, I cooked this for you. I'm starving. I've been working in the kitchen all day. I'm getting first grabs. No, everybody will laugh and say, go on. You've got to be able to put yourself first sometimes. So the chief features are there to teach you when to be in command and when to step back, when to save your life versus die. You know, there's so much that you have no idea about. What makes a person who's been on and on forever and ever about they're going to shoot us, they're going to shoot us, and on the day when it comes to saving a life, they don't save their own, they step in front and take the bullet. Because they've told themselves so many times they're going to be shot, because they're ready to be shot. Okay? We make decisions from the chief feature, and we do them either negatively or positively for a purpose, to launch ourselves into a situation where we can learn. And I talked about being in the mother's womb. When you're in the mother's womb, you will absorb her spirit attitude. Now, a lot of us at this period in time like to come in with the idealist, and I certainly did. So I don't settle for second best. I'll muse on second best and work through it till I can come up with my best scenario that suits me. Now, I might go out into the world with my best scenario and find someone tells me, sorry, Margaret, you're out of date. You have to be updated. Oh, really? I'm flabbergasted. I thought I had everything all together. And I'm going through that right now because I am not up to, doing all the Zoom thing and everything else. I normally have Katie helping me. And because I don't know all those things, here I am pre-recording a talk because she's not well. Okay. So what you need to understand is none of us are know-alls. There are people who walk around pretending they are, but they're actually hiding their idiosyncrasies. They're hiding their insecurities. So in your DNA is, in the telomeres, we're getting deeper and they're learning more and more now. Telomeres are, when you see that loop, you see these little lines coming down, those are the telomeres. And they've learned how to put them into categories, A, D, F, whatever it is, and figure out what works and what doesn't work. But that DNA strand is so long that we're not really ready to be able to understand the tail end of it, which is actually the beginning of it. And so what is in there, in that DNA, is not only your soul coding, but the soul coding of your mother, grandmother before that, and going right back to ancient times, and through the birthing from father, all your grandparents. And so we can see that family tree is going out like this as we go back in time. How many ancestors have you really got? Well, you'll never know here, but in the oneness you will. But does that mean you're pulling on all of them? No, you're just pulling on the ones that are relative to your lesson in this life and the work that you're doing in this world for mankind. So ultimately you are a living, walking example of history when you open your mouth and you talk about the past. Now, here in this world, we may talk about, I remember when I could buy a house for $3,000 and now it's $3 million. Okay, what good does it do to reminisce about how it was when you're dealing with how it is today? So instead of how it was, you need to update yourself and come into modernisms and, like me, have to learn the computer or whatever it is you can do. Now, your spirit guides are updated. So they're going to come through your soul structure coding through the spirit. I'm not going into that now, but it is in the book. And they have done that throughout my life. They've educated me about what I needed to know about what was coming up in my future. So I've always got that little bit ahead of everyone else, which I'm very grateful for. But hey, there's still surprises, there's still shocks, there's still the unexpected, there's still trauma every day. How do you think I felt when I saw the two towers coming down as an image, been up them the day before, and then I was on a boat going over to Staten Island in 1985, and I knew those two towers exactly were coming down like this. Okay? And I called everyone and I told everyone, but I didn't know when. And on the morning it happened, I was sleeping, and the TV was put on, and I went, someone's made a movie of my vision? And my husband said, sadly, no, your vision has come true. I cried more than most, probably, for the fact that I knew so long ago in 1985, and I couldn't get anyone to believe me. I couldn't get anyone to tell anyone of importance to prevent it. I had no way of knowing. I knew there were 2 planes. I even said to my husband, a plane's allowed to fly around, but I didn't see the impact. Spirit didn't show me that. Why? Because I'd have shed terror around the world immediately. And I would have spoiled people from having good 20 years, well, nearly 20 years, of freedom of enjoying those buildings. They would have been every day looking out the window for a plane. So you see, the point is we're not allowed to know all the future as it will unfold. I knew about this particular, I can't say the word because every time you say it, but I will say it, virus, that way, before it happened. And I've been teaching people about colloidal silver long before that. And today, that's all I take. I'm not having any jabs in my arm. Okay, so what does that mean? I'm limited. I can't get on a plane and go anywhere, like visit my grandchildren in England. That's the price I pay for my choice. We all have to pay a price. And I want you to understand that. And the oneness knows that. And it tries to help us. Our spirit guides will come through your soul structure coding into your DNA and stimulate some memory from your past that you've stored in all your cells, in every part of your body, to come forward from here into your images and then into the front of your head, which is what they did. They gave me images that I'd seen the towels before, pictures. I'd seen the view from the back of the boat, and then when I put it all together, I could see what they wanted to show me. Okay? Now, life isn't always that easy. Sometimes they won't tell us, they won't warn us. Okay? I had a car accident in England where I had a big heavy vehicle, and it was on its last legs, and I worked on a farm in those days, and my husband, my second husband, had bought me a Mini, a new car, and so he wanted me to drive it that day to work, and I said no. I had a very strong feeling, no, until I transfer the insurance, I'm not driving it. We are going in the old console. So there I am, parked on the brow of the hill, waiting to do my right turn into the farmland. Let the traffic go by me, there's nothing in the way. Turn right, wham, something hit me. We'll push down the road. I look up to see that I have right in my window the driver of a green double-decker bus. Of course, get the kids out, get everybody out, you know. Well, if I'd have been in that Mini that day, we may have had a different story. But I'm happy to say not one of us was damaged. Okay? My youngest son got knocked unconscious for a minute, and he said, Mummy, I was asleep. And we had them all checked, and everyone was fine. But if I'd have known about that consciously, I probably wouldn't have gone to work at all, that I wouldn't have had that accident, but we would have missed some lessons. One, I had a little puncture from a piece of glass, and there was all this blood on the floor, and I'm examining my kids looking for blood until someone who was a spectator came up and said, dear, it's you that's bleeding. And when we wiped away all the blood, there was nothing. It wasn't even a cut. It was a pinprick. That's how much I was protected. I learned that day the bus driver was in my window practically. The bus had crumbled, but not me. The old car had survived. That was a lesson that day, that I was protected. And I want you to know that you are protected. But you've got to be able to listen, and you've got to understand. So what we need to finalize and wrap up here is that do not suppress your feelings. Work with them. Because if you suppress those feelings, nobody is going to know that you have those feelings. So sharing suppressed feelings with a counselor, a teacher, someone you know will listen, in other words, a best friend. They may not have all the answers, but as you hear yourself talking out, ask yourself, do I sound like my mother or my father or my sister or the teacher or somebody? Look for the copycatting you're doing. If you happen to be sitting near a mirror, have a glance at your face and see what expressions you're showing. If you happen to be sitting, are you hunched out while you're talking, or are you laid back? How are you? Body language. If you suppress the real you, nobody's going to know the real you. So it's very important that you allow yourself freedom of expression. Do not repress history. In other words, if you're holding a secret, you're lying about something, it's going to gnaw at your consciousness. It's going to gnaw at your heart and soul. If you've done something wrong, confess. Not in the sense of, I'm expecting to be punished, but to get it off your chest, to get it off your shoulders, to share with others who are similar, like in a group, a counseling group or something. And if you're depressed, don't wait till you're so mentally confused that you don't know which way is up in your life. As soon as you feel that in some way you are depressed, you can't think of a word, for example. I had that a little while ago, and I had to admit I was stressed because I had a lot of pressure on sorting all the things out when my husband passed, and a lot of things out to do with computers that I know nothing about to speak of. So, stress can lead to depression. Now, you may be a mom who's totally happy with all your kids and family, but there's so much to do that you're overwhelmed. That is depression. That's the sign that you're taking on too much. So, seek counsel. Okay? Now, there are reasons that there are restrictions and limitations in our life. We learn those when we're very young, but we don't need to adhere to those restrictions. So when a mother says, don't touch, she might be saying, it's candy and you can't have it until you've eaten your dinner. That might feel like you're not favored in some way, or you're not loved in some way. But that's an old memory. You know now the truth as an adult, that if you do eat that candy, all right, you won't want your meal, so hey, I'm giving myself a night off, I don't have to cook, right? But that's still an excuse if you know you're overweight and fat and you need to lose weight while you're eating that candy. Because all those years ago your mum said you couldn't have it and you restricted on how much candy you could have. Well, there must have been a reason. Review your reason and come back to self and say, why am I telling myself that I have to have this candy or whatever it is? Why aren't I restricting myself, moderating my eating, and giving myself the love divine I need to give from the back of my head into my consciousness to say, replace it with celery or something else that you like. So those restrictions are yours to make. And you should make them with joy in your mind and heart, that you know you can follow through. Okay? I'll give you one example for me. I smoked until I was 50, and then it was necessary. We quit, my husband and I, until I was 74. And then my husband got very ill, one thing or another, and I started to want to do marijuana. He could get it because he had the doctor's thing. And so he got the marijuana. And I couldn't smoke it because I'm coughing and spluttering all over the place. And my memory of it back when I was in England in my 40s was to mix a little bit of marijuana with a little bit of tobacco. So hey, I started smoking again. And I did that until my husband passed, and then I quit again. And just recently I'm dealing with some more issues, not to do with my health or life, but something else. And Spirit told me to buy it and smoke it, and I did, and I'm working on a very evil entity. That's all I'm going to say. Yes, there are evil entities, and I'm bringing that up because I want you to understand that this world is in negativity right now. And so there are a lot of evil entities, as we call them, up front in consciousness through religion, philosophy, fantasy stories and movies and so on, where we see these negative things, whatever they are, coming at us, and we're like, oh, I don't know what to do. Okay, here's what to do. Stop watching those kinds of things. Instead, watch happy family things, or watch Discovery and see the beauty of this world, and admire, say, an ant's nest and see how they all interact with one another. And remember that they are social. The ants are a social colony, get it together. And we are a colony of people on each piece of land. And whatever we do, we have to learn to integrate not just the lands that we live on, but all the lands of the world. So our illnesses and diseases and people passing over is all a part of the transition between the Piscean and the Aquarian great ages. And if you want to know more about that, then all you have to do is go to my radio show on soundcloud.com/Dr. Margaret Speaks. And you'll find my lectures and talks there of recent times, and all my shows, half-hour shows going back into 2010, called Journey into an Unknown World. And I want to say here that if you are one of these people rushes around like a mad thing, trying to do 900 things at once, all those classes you had in limitations, like sit still for half an hour, or you can only eat so much on a plate, don't gorge yourself, or let's say you have to wear a school uniform because that's a rule. You're limited by that rule. It's up to you now as the adult to put some limits on yourself, to make sure that your life is run at a speed that you're happy with, that you're integrating whatever you're doing in your working life and practical life with your hobby life, with your talents and skills, so that you feel free to enjoy every moment, every day of your life. Now, some of us lose things, whether it's we give it away and then we wish we hadn't given it away because later on we find we need it, or sometimes we're talking about loss of an animal or loss of a human, where we relied upon that person, or we hoped they'd always be around like forever and ever and ever, and never realized that we would lose them at such a young age, or with a disease or whatever it is. And we have to adapt, but stop and ask yourself, what did they give me in my life that I can, in memorandum to them, move forward with it and evolve with it and become so much more with it than I was while they were around. In memory of them, I am becoming greater as a result of their space in my life. Now, overview of that from a spiritual point of view back here. Hundreds of children have you met in school lives. Yeah, countless. Some of them you didn't like, didn't talk to, avoided, but they had an influence on you. Some of them were great best friends who turned their back on you and did a dirty on you or something. Some of them are still friends with you even today, and you love them dearly. But all collectively have helped to formulate what you believe, what you think, how you interact with your peers, how you respect or disrespect, how you hate or how you love, and the conflicts and opposing polarities of our emotional mental states is all instilled into every cell of your body. So coming back to my book, The Rejection Syndrome, here, once again I'm going to show you, okay? Take a picture of it if you can see it, so you can look at it later. I'll get my fingers out of the way. The Rejection Syndrome, okay, by me, Margaret Rogers Van Coops. All right. There are lots of stories where I'm explaining the same soul structure coding in a negative modality and then one in a positive, or vice versa, so that you can read what the soul structure is and the coding, and talk about the DNA from the stories with the ancestors of the characters that we've used. This book was a channeled book. It was channeled by Cornelius Tacitus through me, though I take the gratitude of that and give it to you under my name. Most of my books are channeled from the oneness. Now, the psychological aspect of the three minds in our brain comes forward into judgment, but judgment does not have to be negative. If you are standing on the edge of a precipice and you look down and see you could fall, you will make a judgment decision to step back and advise everyone else who's with you to not go near the edge because it's dangerous. So judgment is not all negative. But if you look at someone and you see them in a red dress and you think it really looks horrible, that is not a call for you to go up to them and say, take that dress off, you look terrible. All you can do is say, oh, you're wearing red, interesting. Well, what, don't you like it? Well, I think you look nice in pink. That's tactful judgment. So some people just don't know how to be tactful. So I'm saying clearly here, if you don't want rejection in your face, or someone to hit your face, then be tactful. It's very important. And the next thing is, don't assume. Assumptions nearly always come out wrong. So if someone's looking miserable, don't assume you're the one that's going to fix them, because you might not fit in with that person's correlation of what they believe their fixer person should be. It might be that they want to be left alone while they wallow in their misery, but ultimately to come back out because their spirit guides are helping them. And you might just be there to just say something like, did you ask spirit guides to help you? And walk away. Okay? Or it might be, here's my card, I'm here if you need me. Don't push on them. Don't assume that this is absolutely the moment, because it might be more for you to realize that the counselor in you wants to speak, but are you speaking to the right person at the right time? So always look for the signs, body language, eyes, the way people look at you, the way they listen. You know, maybe they're sniffling in a tissue and you can't understand a word. Okay, tell them to take some breaths. Don't tell them stop crying. Okay, so you get my idea there, I'm sure. Now, sometimes you're going to find people who have chronic hatred measures. Everything's bad, everything's rotten, don't trust anyone, can't put a good word out for anybody. Well, if they're in that state, they're there in that state to test everyone. They're not going to give up being judgmental. They're not going to stop assuming they know everything about everyone. They're going to be a typical example of being negative. And we need that. We need someone who's a real negative person so that we can measure how well we're doing evolving into being a positive person. So don't knock that person. Ultimately, those who are negative and dangerous and violent and all this will come to face themselves somehow, even if it is at the moment of death. And when they do, they will be looking at what they've cause and effect. And the ultimate thing is negative people create friction, and friction stimulates life, and we evolve and grow. So they've done a good job in the negative to help those who are positive to evolve. So those negative lessons are examples for us who are positive to see and even use as examples in teaching those who are not present. And I've done that today throughout this talk, giving you little excuses and things I did and other people and so on. But ultimately, there comes a point where we face our ups and downs, our idiosyncrasies, and we say, I can't live with me this way anymore. I'm sick and tired, literally sick and tired mentally, and emotionally I'm so traumatized. I don't want to live this way. And at that point there'll be a crisis, and the crisis could be you suddenly get whooping cough and you're coughing and eyes and thing and you're dumping all this stuff in your head and your brain. Or it could be you have the flu and you're dumping all your chest is, pneumonia or something. You're letting the heart chakra let go of all your fear and your pain of life, because we breathe through the lungs. And so, you've been walking around like this, I mentioned earlier, then you're in rejection of life and the vitality of earth. So breathe and embrace the trees and everything I talked about. And, last but not least, transform your spiritual consciousness, open up your psyche. And I am teaching right now for free every other week about psychic things. And this Sunday, I'm talking about the dark side of the negative spirits that are around this earth that do contact humans and do put negative thoughts in your mind. But we've also got goblins and negative spirits on earth, and we've also got demons and things. So if you're interested and want to hear what I have to say, tomorrow, Arizona time, 2 p.m, I'll be on my Zoom page, and if you'd like to come there and learn from me for free, then please join me. That's 2 pack time or 3 hours later Eastern time, so 2, 3, 4, 5 Eastern time. Okay, so I want to say to you that ultimately, if you can awaken to the understanding that you are very open to transforming the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you see the world, you will notice a big difference in yourself. Your dreams will start coming out more positive, or dreaming out some old negative shit that you haven't so deep you didn't know was there. It can be a bit nightmarish, but if you translate, for example, plane crashing into a whole of your history is changing, so the past is gone and dead because the plane is crashed, it's the end. Can't fly it again, so you don't want to repeat your history. It's all you're telling yourself, those kinds of dreams. It's not real. You're not going to be in a plane crash. Okay, then adapt and allow yourself to go into the understanding of the leads of joy. Okay, and joy is like somebody turns up and suddenly their DNA and RNA fits with yours, but they're on a higher vibration and they start sharing some things they do, and you feel like, I want to be with this person and I want to go hither and thither with them and just be friends. And as you correlate that with your relationship with them, they become more involved with you, and who knows, it could end up with a marriage, it could end up with best friends, it could end up with you're only together for a few months and that person's gone, but you've learned a lot. Okay, she's taught you a lot, or he's taught you a lot. So in embracing the joy of your transformation, you'll also be able to connect with your spirit guides. So do your psychic ability, do connect with me. I will have a class on that in a while, and learn to create the new you, a new you that is full of expression, that loves every moment of the day. Even when there's something not good going on, you're able to take a deep breath and say, little test, I'm going to be cool, calm, ask someone else to help me. and if I can't, then this is not the day to do it. I'll shelve it till tomorrow. Be patient with yourself. Be trusting with yourself. And trust your spirit guides. So developing the psychic ability is going to be an online class. I'm still writing it. do go to sumariseducationcenter.com. There's a page there where you can leave your name, your interests, your phone number, your email, and any words, your little box you want to write in about what you're searching for. Write it in, because we want to provide classes that we know are most popular, because the more popular it is, the more students we have sign up, the more integration we can have in the practicals when we come together to do that as well. And of course, the best way we learn is by integration of classes and lessons, exercises, hands-on things, and so on. So that's down the road. Sumaris Education Center is under the banner of universalchristchurch.com. We are a church. My Sumaris Education Center is also a church. I'm an ordained minister. I'm a missionary as well, many things. And that was the pathway I had to take in order to become a professor ultimately, because back in the days when I was born, nobody would have ever dreamed that metaphysical studies would become a major study in this world. They were all woo-woo and hoo-hoo and boo-boo. And so now we can laugh about that. And there are many therapies out, including my crystal acupuncture, pterogram therapy, which I've also had a request to teach, and I'm happy to announce that I've bought, having them made, some crystal points for the crystal acupuncture kits again, and I have the pterograms I'm putting together so that I can teach that course online once we get everything established. We also have easypeasysolutions.org, which is the main place you can go to right now to leave a message for us. Katie Kamara, who is not here today, who's usually here with me today, as I said, she's not well today, taking a break. She will be monitoring anything and everything that you will write. somafusionmedia.com. Somafusionmedia. Ask Dr. I don't know if I got it right. I haven't written them down in front of me because I didn't know this was going to happen, so forgive me, everyone. But please go to her page on Facebook, somafusionmedia.com or katiekamara.com. You'll find her. And she will have all the links up for all the classes that we do pre-record, including this one. So do share it. We appreciate shares, because word of mouth is the best way of people knowing that what we have is something they may want to do. I mean, after all, think of it this way. If someone comes to you and they say, I just had a reading with so-and-so, and she was so accurate and so good, you are more likely to call that person up and go and have a reading with that person than just go online and see if you can find one that sounds okay, with no reviews and no testimonials. Now, I have to admit that all the websites that my husband did for me are down, so we're lacking testimonials, all these things right now. Katie and I are working towards getting a proper online educational university site up for you to learn all these classes. We are also looking for people who are teachers of metaphysical studies who would also like to teach online once we get it up. We're not limiting the language either, so if you're Hispanic or Japanese, I have many Japanese students, they will be invited to teach online through the website as well once we get it all established. In the meantime, please be patient with us, because we are still on the ground level of trying to put everything together. And if something's worth doing, it's worth waiting and doing it right. And it's also part of the oneness that's working with Katie and I, and bringing to us people who are able to support us and bring a team together. So in the meantime, please go to Katie Kamara's page on Facebook, and you'll see all the links that she puts up about her and her talks as well, and her radio shows. And then go to my page, Margaret Rogers Van Coots, and you'll see where she's put the links up there for me too. And hey, if you've got friends that you think might be interested, please share our pages, because I understand that Google's not allowing us all to share the way we used to, so we need your help, please. And the more we bond together, the more we stand for our rights, the more we can get metaphysical studies going, and the more we can move away those people who are rigid and stuck in the old ways and the old religions and the old judgment battles. We need to be unified. All metaphysical people need to come together and bond together and share our outlets and share our works and make ourselves available to anyone out there in the world that's crying out for help because they are psychic and there's no one around them to tell them what to do. They're going to need you. They're going to need you with whatever skills you've got to help them. So don't be afraid of your computer. Use it. So once again, I'm grateful and thank you for listening and thank you for sharing this particular video. And please, please do go to all our other shows we've done in the past. Dr. Margaret and Dr. Katie Speaks. You'll find them all on her page. Don't forget, somafusionmedia.com. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.